Okay, let's just dive right in. We're starting today with a challenge that is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, so radical. It really tries to undermine centuries of accepted history, theology, and, well, geography.
Hmm.
We're talking about the core narrative that defines the very location of the sacred land. It's the belief, the one we all know, that the ancient promise made to Abraham included this huge maximalist territory stretching, from the Nile all the way to the Euphrates.
And that narrative, which has, massive geopolitical implications even today, it isn't just taught in Sunday schools or some niche academic circles. It has been completely institutionalized globally. It's
Right.
in the scholarly text, it's in historical education, it's in political discourse, and it's treated as this foundational, undeniable truth that comes directly from the earliest source texts.
And this is the key, it's been taught without a truly rigorous, critical reexamination of those foundational texts themselves.
Exactly, that's the crucial point.
And that failure to go back to the source text, is the crack in the foundation that we're really going to explore today. Our mission for this deep dive is to get into the meticulous and I'd say groundbreaking research of Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Yes, his work is detailed in his study, Reconstructing Religious Geography, the Jordan Sacred Land Secrets.
So what's his approach? What makes it so different?
Well, Dr. Waleed's approach is really a masterclass in scholarly rigor. He refused to accept the accumulated historical consensus at face value. Instead, he went back to the absolute sources, the original Arabic and the original Hebrew texts.
Okay.
And he correlated every single place name, every geographical descriptor with modern, verifiable physical geography. He essentially asked the land itself to bear witness to the text.
So the result is the really radical claim we need to just absorb for a moment. The traditional map, the one we've all been using in our heads, is based on centuries of interpretive accumulations and, well, later narratives that completely distort the original geography.
That's right.
And the true location of the Exodus events and the sacred land itself is far smaller. It's confined almost entirely to the region of, Palestine and Jordan.
Palestine and Jordan, yes. This analysis functionally removes the massive traditional regions, so the Nile Valley, the Sinai Peninsula, and Mesopotamia. It just removes them from the equation entirely.
That's an astronomical shift, a complete paradigm reversal.
It is. What Dr. Waleed's reconstruction shows is that the widely accepted maximalist borders of the Promised Land, they just don't hold up. Not when you subject them to linguistic and geographic scrutiny of the original primary sources.
So according to this research, the traditional view is built on what? A series of mistakes.
A series of historical, translational, and then finally politically motivated mistakes. It's a compounding error over centuries.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I mean, this isn't some dry academic exercise in moving lines on an old map. It fundamentally redefines history. It reshapes the theological understanding of the covenant, and, maybe most excitingly, it localizes some of the most famous events in human history to a specific, geographically verifiable, and remarkably constrained physical location.
You're going to have a few aha moments.
I think so. So get ready for a deep dive that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Exodus. Let's start with the first major reversal, defining the origin point itself.
Egypt.
Right. The Exodus story always starts in Egypt, this massive land dominated by the Nile. But Dr. Waleed makes a powerful linguistic argument that forces us to stop and really analyze. Does the word we've translated as Egypt actually mean the geopolitical entity of the Nile Valley?
And this is where we really need to slow down and just appreciate the precision of the Semitic languages. The specific Arabic word used in the Quran to describe the land that Musa or Moses and his people departed from is Misr.
Misr, M-I-S-R.
Yes. And the conventional later translation just automatically assumes this, refers to the modern country, Egypt, Cairo, the Nile, the pyramids.
But the linguistic case suggests something far more, flexible, doesn't it?
Exactly. Dr. Waleed's textual analysis asserts that Misr does not inherently denote that specific Nile-dominated country. Instead, its primary meaning, in the source context, is generic. It means the country or a city or simply a settled land.
So the context, not the word itself, is what's supposed to give us the geographic specificity.
What precisely? And this relies very heavily on a critical Quranic example, where the word Misr is used indefinitely. This is really the linchpin of the linguistic argument.
Okay, can you elaborate on that? Why is that indefinite use so crucial?
So we look at the verse. If you look at the structure of the Arabic, the word mist here lacks the definite article al, which means the. This is basically the equivalent of the difference in English between saying go down to the country, which would reference a specific known place like Egypt,
Yeah.
and saying go down to a country, just any settled place.
Ah, I see. So by treating it purely linguistically, Dr. Waleed translates it not as go down to Egypt, but as go down to a country or like a settled place where you can find what you ask for.
Yes.
And that single grammatical point, that little missing owl, it just cracks open the entire accepted map.
It does. Because if the word is indefinite, we then must use the surrounding narrative context, all the other events of the Exodus, to figure out the actual location of Musa's Misr. We can't just assume it's the Nile anymore.
So if we drop that assumption, if we stop thinking about the Nile Valley, where does the narrative context of the Exodus story force us to place the starting point?
Well, the location has to be geographically situated directly next to Al-Yam, the sea, which is the crossing point. That's constraint number one.
Right.
Furthermore, the text consistently referred to the land Musa departed from as the Blessed Land, Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa, or at least in the immediate vicinity of it.
And when you put those two facts together, it has to be near the sea, the crossing point, and it's associated with the Blessed Land. The geography, I imagine, narrows pretty dramatically.
It narrows to one specific region, the territory immediately west of the Dead Sea. This is the area we traditionally call Palestine.
So to be clear, the argument is that Musa and his people departed from a settled land located in what we now call Palestine, not the massive Nile Valley hundreds of kilometers away.
That's the conclusion. It's a truly fundamental shift.
It collapses the distance the Israelites would have had to travel before the crossing. It brings the entire event into a geographically much, much smaller area, basically centered on the Jordan Rift Valley. But this entire geographical shift, it hinges completely on the next crucial reinterpretation, the identity of that crossing point, Al-Yam.
The sea, yes. And this is perhaps the most famous, and I would say the most enduring geographical error of the tradition.
The Red Sea crossing.
The Red Sea crossing. For centuries, the crossing where Pharaoh drowned has been fixed in the minds of billions of people as the Red Sea, either the Gulf of Suez on one side of Sinai or the Gulf of Kaaba on the other.
Right.
Dr. Waleed's research just dismisses this Red Sea narrative as, and this is his quote, a clear lie with no basis. And he says that because it completely fails to meet the textual criteria laid out in the source texts.
Okay, but doesn't this run the risk of being a bit of a circular argument? I mean, are we using the new geography, this Palestine-Jordan model, to prove the textual interpretation, and then using the textual interpretation to prove the geography?
That's a very fair challenge, and it's one that has to be addressed. Dr. Waleed counters it by establishing independent textual criteria. These are derived solely from the Quranic descriptions of Al-Yam. He's testing the location against the text, not the other way around.
And the text provides what? Specific constraints?
4 of them. 4 specific non-negotiable geographical constraints that the crossing site must meet simultaneously.
Okay, what are they?
1, it must be salty. The text uses the description malajaj, which means salty and intensely bitter or brackish.
Okay, intensely bitter.
2, it must be near the Blessed Land. And as we just established, the departure point, the Misr, was Palestine, just west of this body of water.
Makes sense.
3, it must be where Pharaoh drowned. This is its core narrative function. And 4, the crossing had to be from west to east. It must facilitate a movement from the land of departure, which is Mis or Palestine, into the land that was written for them, the sacred land, which we will later confirm is in Jordan.
Okay, so if the Red Sea, say the Gulf of Suez, was the crossing point, that would land them way down south in the Sinai Peninsula, which is a huge territory, and it's geographically disconnected from the sacred land they were supposed to enter.
Exactly. The Red Sea, whether you pick the Gulf of Suez or the Gulf of Aqaba, it fails the proximity test and it fails the directional test.
Oh, so?
Well, if the Israelites are crossing from the Nile Delta, the traditional Egypt, across the Gulf of Suez, they end up smack in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. That just doesn't align with the subsequent narrative of their movement towards the sacred land, which, as we'll see, is defined by Jordanian geography.
But when you apply those 4 constraints, salty, near the Blessed Land, west to east, crossing to the immediate local geography, specifically the area around Musa's Misr in Palestine.
The only body of water in that entire region that fits all 4 criteria is the Dead Sea, salty. It's a definition of Malajash, directly adjacent to the Blessed Land of Palestine.
Yes.
And it's perfectly positioned for a west to east crossing into the region of Jordan. It is the only candidate that works.
Now, this isn't just a claim based on the Quranic interpretation alone, right? I understand Dr. Waleed uses the Torah to cross-reference this and to, corroborate this geographical conclusion.
And this is the definitive internal consistency check. It's crucial. The Torah states that after the crossing, the Israelites were located east of the Jordan.
Okay, just stop and think about that geographically for a second.
Yes. If they'd crossed the Gulf of Suez, or the Gulf Aqaba, they would have been in the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai is still firmly west of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. The geography just doesn't work.
A Dead Sea crossing, however.
A Dead Sea crossing shifts them directly from the western shore, which is Palestine, to the eastern shore, which is Jordan. And that places them instantly and logically east of the Jordan.
So that one geographic alignment, the fact that the post-crossing location only makes sense if the Dead Sea was the point of separation, that's the key piece of evidence that traditional narratives have just either ignored or, I guess, distorted for centuries.
It is. It forces us to redefine the entire Exodus route, and it makes the Jordan Rift Valley the absolute epicenter of the whole narrative.
And once we establish that the crossing was from Palestine to Jordan, then the entire sequence of the 40 years of wandering, the two, must also be contained within a new, much smaller, verifiable area.
That's right. The entire map of the Exodus has been, you could say, rotated and shifted significantly to the northeast. It forces all the traditional Sinai events to be relocated squarely into southern Jordan.
Okay, so let's follow this new itinerary. Our journey begins in Palestine, it crosses the Dead Sea, and it lands us on the east bank in Jordan. This west to east crossing, it establishes the fundamental direction of the whole Exodus.
The physical route established by Dr. Waleed's analysis, his textual and geographic work, is a continuous logical path. It moves from the west bank of the Dead Sea, the Quranic myths, or blessed land across Al-Yam, the Dead Sea, to the east bank, Jordan. And this immediate post-crossing trajectory moves them straight into the wilderness areas they would inhabit for the next 4 decades.
So what are the sequential stops? Where do they go as they move south into the Jordanian landscape?
Well, after landing on the east bank, the route proceeds sequentially through regions whose ancient names are, and this is incredible, still perfectly preserved in the modern Arabic naming of Jordan. Yes. The first major stop was Al-Araba, which corresponds precisely to the modern Wadi Araba. That's the deep, arid rift valley that runs south from the Dead Sea down towards Aqaba.
Okay, I know where that is.
Next was Faran. This is identified as Jabal al-Faran, or the Mounts of Paran. And then, crucially, they arrived at the threshold, the gateway to the sacred land, a place called Kadesh Barnea.
And Kadesh Barnea is identified with what specific site?
Dr. Waleed identifies it conclusively with the famous archaeological site of Petra.
Wow, okay. So, if they are moving from the Dead Sea down through Wadi Araba towards Petra, then we are completely throwing out the notion that the 40 years of wandering LT took place in the, vast open plains of the traditional Sinai Peninsula.
Absolutely. The traditional placement in Sinai relies entirely on interpretive traditions that just disregard the specific and unique geography described in the source text. The text described the area of wandering using geographic names that are exclusively localized in the Jordanian landscape. You won't find them in Sinai.
So what are these specific locations? What defines this forbidden land, the Muharrama? I think for the audience, it really helps to visualize this space.
Right. When you look at the textual evidence, the T is definitively located in southern Jordan. It's not some vague, amorphous desert. It is a specific defined region, and it's characterized by high plateaus, deep wadis, and very distinctive geological features.
And this area encompasses what?
It encompasses Wadi Araba, which is Araba. It includes the Mounts of Faran, which mark the western border, Hazeroth, which is identified as Hezrun, and that's the general region of the wilderness itself.
Okay.
Then there's Tolfel, which is the modern city of Tafila, a major city in that area, the area of South Karak, and, as we just established, Petra, which is Kadesh Barnea, serving as the physical gate they were forbidden to enter.
So when you look at a map of southern Jordan, you see Petra, Tafila, Karak. This area forms a cohesive, localized geographical unit. It functions perfectly as a muharrama, a region where a large group of people could be contained for 40 years without being able to move forward into the promised territory.
It creates a self-contained, plausible geographical narrative. If you place the wandering in the vicinity of these sites, you are dealing with a landscape that acts as a sort of a natural crucible. It's defined by geological barriers and the historical routes, through the Araba Rift Valley.
Which is a dramatic contrast with the sprawling, undifferentiated desert of the traditional Sinai narrative.
Completely different.
This precision of location, it helps us move past abstraction. The Israelites weren't just, wandering randomly in some giant desert. They were confined to a specific geographical prison defined by the Jordan-Dead Sea Rift Valley system. Now, speaking of that unique geological system, I understand Dr. Waleed uses a specific Quranic verse about water mixing to further lock down the location. How does this unique feature of the Jordan Rift Valley function as textual proof?
This is a brilliant example of how Dr. Waleed uses the intersection of the text and just undeniable physical reality, which speaks of the two seas meeting, one sweet, one salty.
Okay, and traditionally, how is that interpreted?
Traditionally, it's often interpreted metaphorically or, universally as a general principle of nature.
But if the Exodus narrative is localized to the Jordan Rift Valley, then this verse describing two meeting seas, one fresh, one intensely salty, it must refer to the most prominent hydrological feature of that specific region.
Precisely. When that geographic lens is applied, the verse becomes hyperlocalized. It provides even more evidence that the events took place exactly here.
So the two seas are?
Number one, the salty sea, the Milajasia, is, without any question, the Dead Sea, Al-Yam. We've already established that the Dead Sea is the required salty crossing point. Yes. Number two, the Sweet Sea, Asbi-Firat, is the Jordan River.
And the Jordan River flows directly into the Dead Sea at the north end. It creates this distinctive zone where the fresh river water literally meets and mixes with the intensely saline water of the Dead Sea.
This is a phenomenon unique to the system created by the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. The text is describing a specific geographical truth of this region. If you shift the location of the Exodus to the Nile or to the traditional Red Sea crossing, that described phenomenon just vanishes.
Right.
There is no comparable natural meeting of a sweet river and an intensely salty, brackish sea in the Sinai landscape that is central to that narrative. It just doesn't exist there.
So the geography itself becomes this consistent, unwavering witness. It confirms the textual analysis that placed the crossing and the Tih in Jordan. The physical continuity of the Jordan Dead Sea system, it validates the entire reconstruction.
It forces us to accept that the biblical geography must be understood through the lens of the shared Semitic roots and the actual, verifiable physical reality of Palestine and Jordan, a reality that was simply ignored when later traditions fixed the location somewhere else.
Okay, this section, I think, is the core of the proof. If we are asking you, the listener, to abandon centuries of traditional knowledge, we need concrete, irrefutable evidence. And Dr. Waleed's strongest argument seems to lie in the detailed linguistic and spatial correlations between ancient names found in the texts and modern Jordanian sites. Let's start with the gateway city.
Kadesh Barnea. It's the absolute linchpin of the entire Exodus narrative. It is the physical gate of the sacred land. It's where the spies were sent in, and it's where the Israelites refused the command to enter. It defines the point of no return.
And its location, according to Dr. Waleed, is not vague at all. It's identifiable through surrounding landmarks.
Precisely. The texts place Kadesh Barnea near Mount Harun, which is synonymous with the biblical Horeb, or Hur. And it is surrounded by the Jordanian sites we just listed, Paran, Tophel, and Dizahab. This clustering provides a precise geographic triangulation point.
And based on this, the definitive identification is made. Kadesh Barnea is Petra.
Yes. Great.
To equate the legendary Kadesh Barnea, the site of this foundational covenant refusal, with the global archaeological landmark of Petra that's a massive claim. What makes the link undeniable beyond just, mere proximity?
The undeniable proof is the geographical calibration that is provided within the Torah itself. It's a stunning detail that is often overlooked. The text states that the journey from Horeb, the mount of the law-giving, identified with Mount Harun, near Petra to Kadesh Barnea, which is Petra, takes exactly 11 days.
Okay, let's just dwell on that for a moment. We are talking about ancient travel metrics. This is calculated for a large nomadic group. This isn't a modern GPS measurement on a highway.
Correct. An 11-day journey in ancient texts represents a very specific, measurable physical distance for a large caravan. And when Dr. Waleed mapped the current route between the accepted location of Mount Harun, which is Jabal Harun just southwest of Petra, and the site of Petra itself, that distance aligns perfectly with the known historical measure of an 11-day journey.
This precision suggests that the original sacred texts were not written as some abstract theology. They were written as a direct reference to a very real, measurable map with known travel times. It's almost like a hidden geographical timestamp that's built right into the narrative.
It is the ultimate consistency test. If you place Kadesh Barnea anywhere else, say in the traditional vague location in the central Sinai desert, for instance, that 11-day metric from Horeb, wherever Horeb is traditionally placed, it immediately falls apart. The math doesn't work.
Wow.
Only the connection between Mount Harun and Petra provides this perfect temporal and spatial alignment.
So, one of the world's most recognizable historical sites, the treasury at Petra, is not just some ancient city, but the literal geographical site of the Israelites' foundational refusal of the covenant.
That's the argument. And that leads us directly to Mount Tur, the location of the covenant and the giving of the law, which is traditionally fixed as Mount Sinai in the deep recesses of the Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
And again, Dr. Waleed applies the textual constraints from the Quran and Torah, and the Sinai location fails the proximity test completely.
What are the three non-negotiable requirements that the text demands of Mount Tur?
Okay, 1, it must be near the sacred land, which we now know as southern Jordan. 2, it must be linked directly to the covenant established with the Israelites. And 3, it must be geographically close to the T, the wilderness of wandering.
So, since the T is situated in southern Jordan, any location deep in the Sinai Peninsula is geographically impossible. It would be separated from the T by the massive Gulf of Aqaba and hundreds of kilometers of, well, irrelevant desert.
That's the geographical constraint that shatters the tradition. The location identified that perfectly satisfies all three criteria is Mount Seir, or Jabal el-Seir. This is a major mountain range located south of the Dead Sea and extending down towards Aqaba. And it places it immediately adjacent to the defined area of the T in Kadesh Barnea, which is Petra.
This location, Mount Seir, is a total contradiction of the long-standing Sinai tradition. But the support isn't just contextual, it's reinforced by the Torah as well, I take it.
Yes, the Torah narrative explicitly links Horeb, which is synonymous with the law-giving site, to Mount Harun, to Paran, and to Kadesh Barnea. We have already established that these three are verified Jordanian sites: Mount Harun, the Mounts of Paran, and Petra.
The geographical dominoes just keep falling. If the covenant was given at Horeb or Tur, and Horeb is intrinsically linked to neighboring Jordanian sites, then the covenant mountain must also be in Jordan. The entire argument is this interlocking system of consistency.
It all has to fit together.
And this brings us to what feels like the most visceral evidence: the incredible survival of ancient place names. Dr. Waleed argues that the exact phonetic and geographic matching between ancient Hebrew or Torah names and modern Arabic place names in Jordan provides, well, incontrovertible proof that this region is the true setting.
This is truly the smoking gun. I mean, when you consider the vast stretches of time involved, the degree of phonetic retention in the local Arabic, which itself is a Semitic language, is just astonishing. Dr. Waleed emphasizes that this precise correlation, in his words, cannot be a coincidence. It represents a continuous, unbroken geographic memory that's embedded in the landscape of southern Jordan.
Okay, let's dedicate some time to these specific name matches. How does the process of identifying these names work across the Semitic language roots?
So the process involves comparing the linguistic structure and the root meaning of the biblical name with the structure and location of the Arabic name. And the continuity is just astounding.
Give us an example.
Okay, take the biblical name Suf. This name is perfectly preserved as Safa. Safa is the Arabic name for the region of Gawar al-Safi, which is located directly at the south end of the Dead Sea.
And the geographical location is exactly where a place named Suf would be expected in the Exodus trajectory.
Exactly. It's the right name in the right place. Then there's the name Tofel. It's preserved almost identically as Tefillah, which is a major governorate and city in southern Jordan, located right in the center of the reconstructed area of the T.
Wow.
Then there's Lolban, a name mentioned early in the Wandering, which is still known as Alaban in East Araba. Hazeroth, referring to the general camp location of the T, corresponds to Hezrun, which designates the general wilderness area.
Okay, and one more.
And finally, Dizahab. This is another directional marker mentioned in the texts, and it matches Diban, located north of Karak, marks the northern boundary of the Sacred Land area.
So the journey mapped out by these names, Dizahab, through Tefillah, through Hazrun to Petra, it's not a theoretical construct. It is a continuous, verifiable map using modern place names that still bear the phonetic and linguistic memory of the ancient events.
Yes, it makes the lost geography feel less lost and more just misfiled in translation. The people who lived there just kept calling these places by their original names. The modern Arabic geography functions as an encyclopedia of the ancient narratives.
Okay, now we have to address the specific and I think highly controversial linguistic link Dr. Waleed makes between the site name Tafel, or Tefillah, and the Jewish prayer ritual of tefillin. This moves from geography into some deep theological critique.
It does, and it's important we report this finding impartially, as it is a core piece of his analysis. Dr. Waleed suggests that the place named Tafel, or Tefillah, situated near the Sacred Land, was so significant in the history of the Israelites that its memory was later formalized into a religious ritual.
And he's linking the name structure.
He links the name structure of Tafel, which he argues may imply a deviation or a sort of secondary sacred site, directly to the ritual of tefillin, the small black box worn on the head and arm during prayer.
And his interpretation of this link is, as you said, extremely provocative.
Yes. Based on his reading of the linguistic root and the historical context of deviation within the T, he describes this connection as representing an idolatrous satanic Kaaba.
Wow.
He argues that the ritual itself, by echoing the place name of a site that may have been associated with sin or rebellion during the 40 years, symbolizes a later divergence from the original covenant that was centered at Mount Seir. The focus is on the repurposing of a geographical memory into a religious practice.
That is a staggering claim. It suggests that the very geography of southern Jordan was so culturally potent that its place names became embedded in subsequent religious practice, sometimes, in Dr. Waleed's view, as a shadow of the original true sacred land.
This is the power of his methodology. He's using the deep intersection of text, geography, and language to challenge not just locations, but the practices and traditions that evolved from the distortion of those locations.
So we have established the full geographical picture now. Palestine to the Dead Sea crossing, 40 years of wandering contained in southern Jordan, and Petra as the gate. Now we can definitively pinpoint the ultimate goal, the true location of the sacred land, Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa.
Yes. The Sacred Land was the land specifically written for the Israelites under the covenant, and we have now mapped its borders using the verifiable checkpoints established by Dr. Waleed.
What were the defining geographical features that constrained its boundaries?
Well, it was required to be situated east of the crossing point, the Dead Sea. It had to be near Mount Tur, which is Mount Seir, and it was bordered on all sides by the T locations, Paran, Dizahab, and Tofel. This forms a clear, compact, geographically contiguous area that functions as the destination of the Exodus.
So when we map that boundary using modern geographical terms, Karak, Tefillah, Petra, Wadi Araba, and Mount Seir,
the Sacred Land, Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa, is geographically defined as the area encompassing Karak, Tefillah, Petra, Wadi Araba, and Mount Seir, the region of southern Jordan, east of the Dead Sea. This is the land they were commanded to enter.
And this localization, it leads directly back to the covenant condition that defined their fate for those 40 years.
Absolutely. All my people, enter the sacred land which Allah has written for you. Their refusal, which was based on fear of the inhabitants, was a breach of that covenant.
And this refusal immediately triggered the 40 years of prohibition, the Muharrama, within the Taif, the localized geographical prison we just defined.
Precisely. The geography dictates the narrative punishment. The true sacred land was never intended to be a maximalist empire stretching across 3 modern countries. It was a defined, specific region east of the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan.
It creates a closed, self-contained, and consistent history that requires no geographic leaps or historical distortions. The entire story is contained right there, within the Jordan Rift Valley system. This brings us back to the crucial question that I'm sure you are all asking. If the evidence is so clear in the original texts, how did such a precise, localized geography get inflated into this massive Nile to Euphrates narrative and get mislocated across these vast territories?
Right.
Dr. Waleed identifies a sequence of, 3 compounding causes for this historical distortion?
Yeah.
It moves from linguistic error all the way to political manipulation.
Yes, the erosion of the original geography was a layered process.
Yes.
It wasn't just an accident. The first layer was purely technical. The problem of inaccurate and weak translations of the original text. As soon as the sacred texts were moved from their original Semitic languages into, say, Greek, Latin, and then subsequent languages, the subtle, context-driven linguistic definitions were lost. The indefinite Misr, a country, was rigidly translated as Egypt, the Nile Valley, simply because that was the major power center known to the translators.
And that one mistake alone shifted the entire starting point by hundreds of miles.
Exactly. So the language itself was the first casualty.
What was the second major mechanism of corruption?
The second layer was, you could call it, academic neglect. The deliberate separation of physical geography from the sacred texts, Scholarship began treating the biblical narratives abstractly, as solely theological or spiritual stories, and they neglected the necessity of confirming site names with verifiable physical locations.
And this created a vacuum.
A vacuum where interpretations and traditions, often built upon those initial weak translations, could supersede physical reality. The tradition of the Red Sea crossing, for example, took root because scholars stopped demanding that the post-crossing geography actually fit the text.
And the third cause is the most historically and politically charged, and it leads directly to the inflated claims we see today.
Absolutely. It was the political use of geography. This occurred in two major phases. First, there was the systematic misplacement of the distinct events that occurred in Jordan onto the Sinai Peninsula. A classic case of academic misattribution, you could say, designed to move the foundational narrative away from its true, localized center.
And this geographical displacement was crucial for establishing later claims.
It was.
And the ultimate goal of that displacement.
The ultimate goal, Dr. Waleed argues, was the systematic creation and proliferation of the fictional Nile to Euphrates narrative. This maximalist, geographically impossible narrative was constructed specifically to serve later political and expansionist agendas. And it completely obscured the actual, localized, and verifiable promise that was focused only on southern Jordan.
So the corruption moved from accidental translational error to deliberate political design.
Yes, and this analysis provides crucial context. The story wasn't just, forgotten. It was intentionally manipulated to justify territorial claims that far exceeded the original textual promise.
Which is precisely why Dr. Waleed's methodology is so critical. It's not just a collection of findings, it's a scientific model for how to reconstruct history and theology by prioritizing objective criteria. So let's just detail those core principles, the scientific method that allowed him to break through centuries of error.
His methodology relies on 5 critical pillars, and they really serve as a checklist for any honest historical reconstruction. 1. The text must precede tradition and heritage. The source language is paramount. It overrides the accumulation of later, often inaccurate interpretations.
Okay, text over tradition.
2. Geography must precede interpretation and exegesis. The physical world is the immovable test for the narrative. If the land doesn't fit the specific descriptions provided in the original texts, the interpretation is simply wrong.
Land over interpretation. Got it.
3. Employing the shared Semitic language roots to unlock the true, surviving meaning of place names, like connecting Suf to Safa. This linguistic link is the bridge across millennia. 4. Critically reviewing existing narratives and being willing to dismiss those based on weak textual or non-existent geographic evidence, like the Red Sea or Sinai traditions.
What was the last one?
And 5. Utilizing the integration and consistency between the Quran and the Torah texts, treating them as mutually reinforcing documents that, when you read them correctly, pinpoint the identical true locations.
This rigorous application of text, language, and geography is what allowed Dr. Waleed to achieve this complete remapping, moving the history of the Exodus from the realm of, mythological geography to verifiable reality. It is a powerful testament to the power of returning to the original sources.
It is. And when we step back and review this profound shift, the scope of this deep dive is truly astonishing. We've witnessed the entire religious geography of the Exodus recontextualized into a localized, verifiable Jordanian landscape.
So let's just run through the massive scope of that shift one final time, just to cement it in your mind. The ancient origin point, Mislir, is now identified as the Blessed Land in Palestine. The legendary Red Sea crossing is definitively localized to the Dead Sea. The massive Sinai Peninsula wandering is replaced by the specific, verifiable region of southern Jordan, the T.
And the sacred land itself is definitively localized to a specific territory east of the Jordan River, centered on Karak, Tefillah, and Petra.
The profound implication is that when the geography is restored to its proper place, the contradictions just vanish.
They do. The narratives from both the Quran and the Torah, when you view them through the lens of verifiable Jordanian and Palestinian geography, they suddenly align perfectly. History returns to its correct, focused trajectory.
This work really is a groundbreaking recovery of knowledge. Knowledge that was systematically buried under centuries of interpretation, weak translation, and geopolitical manipulation. We must reinforce that the definitive documentation and publishing of this geographical shift comes from Dr. Khaled Waleed and his work, Reconstructing Religious Geography, The Jordan Sacred Land Secrets.
And as Dr. Waleed notes, this work isn't an end. It's a beginning. It's the foundation for a new phase of research based on text, reason, and geography. It challenges the entire academic and theological establishment to look beyond the accepted story.
So here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with, the open question for your own reflection. If the physical landscape and the sacred texts align so precisely once later political agendas and accumulated translations are removed, what other historical narratives that define our present day might be waiting to be corrected? Corrected simply by returning to the original source language and asking the land itself, the immovable geographic witness, to bear witness to the truth.
A powerful question.
Dive deeper into that thought, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.